Shashank, Anirban, should we start?
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good evening and thank you for joining in today's panel discussion, which really is going to focus on Geek 2.0 and Aeon's research that has just been released, talking about the gig economy and how it's really shaping up. Before we get into the topic, a round of introductions. Quick introduction for me. My name is Rupang. I'm a partner and chief commercial officer for Aeon Consulting. Spent 15 years with the firm across diverse areas. Spent a year with Conferry, joined back last month. And in addition to looking after the financial services practice, I'm also the chief commercial officer, taking care of all new product solutions for Aeon. Today, we are joined by two individuals for whom the research and practice both in the gig economy is pretty core to what they do. So we have Shashank. Shashank, welcome. Shashank heads Tab Chief, and Shashank began his entrepreneurial journey at the age of 21 when he launched an on-demand tutoring app for competitive exams called Advice. I believe I think the 50 years of history of BITS. I think Shashank, you were the first one to be able to actually sell a company. And then I think Shashank joined forces with his Advice co-founders to start Tab Chief in 2016. And today, Tab Chief actually works across more than 100,000 professionals in the gig workforce and help them showcase their strengths and their ability to the whole startup ecosystem as well as large multinational companies as well. And I think has completed more than 50,000 gigs so far since inception, if I'm not mistaken. Shashank also has received a fair amount of backing from more than 50 plus investors, including some really large names. And incidentally, one good thing to know is that Tab Chief was also ranked number 3, I believe, in LinkedIn's annual list of best startups to work for in 2019, which I guess has a lot of learning for all of us in the human capital consulting space. So, Shashank, thank you for being here.
Thank you so
And
much.
then we have Irvan. Irvan is a colleague. Irvan is the director with Aeon's rewards and performance practice. He's with the firm for close to 8 years now. And he takes care of the consulting practice for the technology and the KPO BPO sector for us. He's based in Bangalore, and he leads also our charge in the advisory space in terms of advisory consulting work. In addition to leading technology practice for Aeon, Anirban also heads Aeon's research and incubation lab. This is the part of Aeon which actually helps incubate and launch new solutions, products, and the human capital and HR domain. Working on prototypes, working on research, working on surveys. He leads a team of around about 10 people, and he also coordinates with our global products and solutions teams to ensure that the best of the HR world can actually come to clients in India. So Anirban, thanks for joining us. Anirban also led Aeon's research, which was conducted some time back, focusing on the gig economy and what is really happening in the gig workspace. Now, let me come to the topic, in that sense. Funnily enough, 2 years back, I moderated a panel, actually a debate on the gig workforce at Aeon's annual rewards conference, which is our largest event. This was sometime in July of 2018. And what I recollect talking about was the fact that we spoke about the need and the rise of gig, how it was becoming a force to reckon with globally. We spoke about trends in the US, how more and more people are embracing the gig workforce there, both in terms of the demand and supply side. Then we spoke about Europe. We spoke about that it's coming to Asia. When we spoke about the fact that it's still nascent days or nascent times in India, people are getting the hang of it. People are talking about it. But whether it will sustain itself, whether we will actually see more and more sectors taking to it, will we have enough jobs which will be giggable, as you call it? Will there be enough roles which could be aligned to the gig economy? there were questions that we had asked in that debate, and we had heard of pros and cons, or what are the good things about gig. We also asked the tough questions. What about rewards? What about security? What about a sense of allegiance? What about sense of culture? How can people embrace that? Will it only be very, very transactional, or can it actually become far more long term in its own evolution? We'll ask those questions then. Now, funnily, the research that we have just done, has thrown up some arguments which are in continuation of what we spoke about then, and lots of counterintuitive arguments as well. It's the research, which covered 145 odd companies across sectors, said that more than 65% of the employers would want to increase the gig workforce that they currently work with. So there is a positive aspect to the fact that they see this as something to stay in the future. There's also talk about the fact that the relationship to engage the gig workers or the freelancers is deepening. It's not going to be transactional, but there is enough to be done to engage them more and deepen the relationship. A relationship, not transaction, right? Which means there's going to be more and more repeat work being given to them, and more infrastructure coming into play to engage with them. We also saw in the research that there is now a tendency or a thought to tweak the rewards that will actually flow to the gig workers. There will be a different lens of looking at the performance management system that will actually enable us to track how gig workers are actually doing, performing. And lastly, there is now a shift towards more non-traditional sectors who are looking at gig workforce. So while technology and manufacturing were more attuned to gig workers for the longest time, we are seeing FMCG and BFSI, to name a few, which were not there as traditional gig force embracing sectors, are now talking about the gig workforce. So lots of things coming up in the research, which I will not talk about now, but I'll probably ask both of you to shed more light on. Anirban, more from a research perspective. Shashank, you obviously have the practical experience of working with these sports for the last 4 years. You've seen things change, so that aspect will be good to know. But let me first start by asking you a very, very broad, basic question. And Anirban, let me go to you. What is gig 2.0? Has gig changed over the last few years? Is it a new form of gig that we are seeing now? There is a lot of noise. There is a lot of talk. Everybody wants to talk about gig, but what does it really mean? If you could just start with that, that will be good for us to get a good platform.
Sure. So let me start off by going back in history a bit, right? So if you looked at and if you define the gig worker as a contingent worker, what you would have seen historically is at the back of every recession, that workforce would shoot up because unemployment went up in the market. People would look for quote unquote gigs to do, and over a period of time, as the economy recovered and jobs came back, you would actually see a dip in the gig workforce that was there. I think there were the watershed event which started to deviate from that trend was the last recession of 2010. Because what you will see happen then was that as economic growth came back, it didn't come back with jobs. So you had what in India also we debate as jobless growth, and you had that as a secular trend happening across the world. I think that's a seminal event which marks for me the rise of Gig 2.0. I think right now where we are with COVID, with a pandemic which is wiping out large degree of economic activity, I just think it's going to get accelerated, right? And I think organizations are also at a point where they're actually looking at their talent as a cost element, and therefore looking at more variable ways of fulfilling that demand than they have in the past. So for me, the Gig 2.0 is a convergence of economics. It's a convergence of technology that allows people to be able to deliver work no matter where they are in the world. And as I look at it, as organizations manage a more volatile environment going forward, this model, if nothing else, is going to get stronger. So that for me is Gig 2.0, an environment where what you would expect as a traditional downturn in gig demand as economy comes back doesn't really happen anymore.
So just to provide a little bit more of that, Anirban. So you mentioned a lot of factors which have helped or have led to the gig noise or the gig aspect become larger and larger. You spoke about COVID now. You spoke about recession. You spoke about convergence. You spoke about technology. It would be fair to say that even if things move away from recession and we are doing better than the economy, right? And then we don't have a COVID situation anymore. We sort of get back to normalcy, right? Which is more of the status quo that we all want eventually, right? But
Yeah.
even then, with the focus of technology and the conversion that we are seeing, and also the kind of lives maybe people want to lead, because it also gives a lot of flexibility. We didn't speak about that. Do you still
Mm.
think that that will still be a strong enough force to thrust gig going forward?
For sure. So I think we need to break this down into a couple of different elements, right? On one hand, I think as transformation happens and more and more organizations are undergoing digital transformation, I think there's a recognition of the fact that some of the key skills they require to transform the organization don't exist within. And trying to build that out ground up is going to take time, and you will lose market competitiveness. And I think that's where a freelancing variable talent source becomes really useful, because you have the best available out there. They come in, do their bit, go away. It's talent that's available on tap, right? So the way I see it, as disruption in the economy increases, more and more organizations looking at harnessing the power of tech, I actually see the gig workforce really expanding. I think the other thing, and maybe more so for India than maybe some of the other economies, is the myth of that cradle to grave job for us has been busted, I think, in the last decade or so, right? I mean, I'm sure all of our parents had one job that they joined and they retired from. It's fair to say none of us will do that, right? And I think in the mind of the employee, there is also that uncertainty to say that, my organization may ask me to leave whenever, and should I just try to build something on my own where I can control my destiny? The third one, I am a bit more skeptical about, right? To say that, is it a factor of age? I honestly don't know that. If you're first generation in India coming out of humble backgrounds, is gig necessarily going to provide you with the security that you want? Probably not. If you are second, third generation, family is done well for itself, you have the social security net to go experiment. I honestly believe there you will see some traction, right? And therefore, I don't look at India, the Gen Z or whatever you want to call it, as a homogeneous group. I think there'll be people who will look for the stable employment because it provides security. But I think more and more, as the middle class becomes more affluent, you will see people migrating towards saying, I don't want to be a corporate slave and I want to start controlling some of my own destiny.
Sure. And given that you started speaking about the supply side and what people look for when they're looking for freelance, so good time to go across to Shashank. Shashank, why don't you tell us about the whole idea of Tap Chief? I mean, we understand, you get the pulse of the people really well. Your first venture advice was more about this on-demand tutoring app for competitive exams, so you know what sort of professional advice people need, how to get it to them. So how did Tap Chief come about? And I think when did you start seeing freelancing as a possible career choice for people in India?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rupank, for having me here, and thank you, Anirban, for some wonderful thoughts. Uh, yeah, so getting right into it, I think for us, as you mentioned, once we exited our first venture while we were still undergraduates, I think one thing was a eureka moment, right, for us, because up until then, conventional wisdom honestly was, hey, go to a great college, which is why I slogged to get to BITS, and then go get a great job, right? I think it was as simple as that. And for the first time, when we sort of saw a reasonable amount of cash in our bank accounts by virtue of something we built largely with skills picked off the internet, I think that was a seminal moment in some sense, at least in my life, because what that made us feel and realize is that, hey, and we, in all honesty, Rupang, that we didn't rate our skills very highly. So what we thought was that if we could pull this off, then there must be tons of people who have amazing skills, who are looking for more and more avenues to really leverage their skills to monetize it, right? And that those avenues definitely looked like it could be beyond jobs. And on the other side, when we were building the first venture, a lot of times we struggled to get access to the right set of people who knew what they were doing. So both of these ideas sort of coalesced at some point where we said, there is a set of people or set of entities, which are largely businesses and companies, who are looking for talented people to come in and help out on their various business objectives from time to time. And then there are people with skills who would love to monetize it in different ways if they could, where they didn't have to commit to a company or commit to a job, but commit to an objective. And as long as that objective is complete, it makes sense. And we saw a huge role for technology to sort of come in and play a role here, like how it had in so many other sectors, which were equally disorganized, if not more. And that's how really the thought process of TapChief began. Of course, we've had our own evolution over the last 4 years. We started off more of as a expert on call sort of a business, evolved to enabling companies to sort of just connect to freelance talent and help with their logistics. And today we are an end-to-end managed marketplace where companies order various kinds of tasks that are cataloged on our platform. And those are in turn fulfilled and completed by a variety of freelancers that exist on our platform, primarily the areas of marketing, content creation, design, and so on and so forth. So the question to answer, when did we feel fundamentally that, freelancing has hit home, or, it's the time now, etc. I think what I can safely say is that every year, the way I measure it, honestly, in a very crude manner, has been to see that, hey, how many people are pitching what I used to pitch a year or two ago back to me itself, and that's happening a fair bit lately, especially post COVID. But I think there has definitely been a certain level of shift post 2018, 2019 for sure. And it's only gotten accelerated due to remote work, due to COVID, and everything that's out there. Because there are various factors in play that we need to understand, right? I think one, post the geofication, etc. I think more and more businesses, both legacy and new age, I think really understood the importance of digital and importance of winning digitally, right? So now when digital comes into place, it's everything from technology, marketing, growth, communication, design, all of those pieces come into play. So if you were to imagine a manufacturing company which is exporting things to multiple regions in the world, today, maybe 2 years ago or even 5 years ago, they would not have thought that it's super important for them to have a great digital presence, right? Whereas today, customers world over expect you to have and be at a certain level of quality. Thereby, even traditional businesses understand the need to really have a solid digital presence. I think that's one thing that's changing by virtue of customer behavior in itself, right? I think, if I'm not wrong, one of the surveys said, I think good 60 to 70% of B2B buyers research a company online before they go and make a purchase or even make an inquiry in the first place. So I think that has definitely moved a lot of businesses towards having some level of digital thing. Now, how does this connect to gig economy? It connects to gig economy because a lot of the digital skills that are necessary to really win are unfortunately in a lot of traditional companies and industries not core to their business, and thereby are not areas where they traditionally hired people full time, right? So that is where, like Anirban mentioned, it becomes very difficult to suddenly go hire a CMO, build it ground up completely end to end, where as opposed to hopefully bringing on a consultant, bringing on somebody who can come in, achieve that for an organization in the short term period. Right? So I think that's one piece where they fundamentally didn't have the expertise in house. I think the other piece that's contributing heavily to gig economy is all sorts of bandwidth constraints. Right? Across the board, you talk to any business, from a small 10-member startup all the way up to multinational companies with thousands of employees. Everybody in every talent acquisition and HR person has one pet peeve, right? That their offer to joining ratios are lower than ever. Simply because there is, more and more exposure on the professional side. So nobody is applying to one or two jobs at a time, right? Everybody is going and interviewing at so many places, and for whatever reason, either they go with the best offer or they go with the best manager, best brand. It's really hard to make out. So you rolling out an offer as an employer today is not a guarantee that the position will be filled and you will have somebody joining you, right? So I think that is translated into various levels of bandwidth constraints and long hiring cycles, which has made people and companies start looking at, hey, can I bring somebody who can come in quickly as well, right? I think that has become a much bigger factor today than it was even 2 years back. So lastly, from a professional standpoint, I think it is fairly simple in my head, and what we have seen at TapChief across professionals of all realms, across categories, across various kinds of skills. I think the fundamental thing is that today professionals are definitely more daring than ever. They have been in India for sure. I think also the fact that COVID accelerated the thought process that job security is more of a myth than a norm, uh, by virtue of which more and more professionals are honestly nowadays thinking that, hey, if my job is not ultimately secure, how do I secure my income streams, right? So even if I have a great job, maybe shall I start teaching on weekends? Maybe shall I start creating content? Shall I, employ my skill as a developer to do something else, right? So I think while they're not moving away significantly from the core skill, but the application of that skill is definitely increasingly becoming quite varied, right? So it's not no longer just that if I'm a developer, I'll only write code. I could be teaching other aspiring developers. I could be creating course content for learning. I could be doing so many more things. So I think that application aspect is coming more fervently amongst professionals. So some are obviously doing it on their own with referrals, with networks, etc. Some are leveraging platforms like TapChief and a couple of other platforms that are upcoming in India. So I think a lot of this is slowly contributing to the, in some sense, the resurgence of gig economy. And more importantly, while gig economy has always existed in India, at least for the last decade, across the blue collar workforce, I think at the knowledge worker or white collar workforce, it is definitely starting to make a huge headway. And my strong belief is that the next decade is going to be what, at least at TapChief, we say the decade of the solopreneur, where the independent workers start figuring out how do they build a business on their own individually with the skills that they have.
Oh, okay, sure, Shashank. Thanks for that. That's a very good way of giving us a quick insight of what led to TapChief and how you see this play out. You did mention about a couple of things. One was about that in many organizations, the kind of skill set which they need, is an issue, and which is why they look out for gig talent to be able to fulfill that. And you also spoke about the whole issue of bandwidth. So let me use that, and Anirban, come back to you. On the demand side, what are the industries, sectors that we have traditionally seen the demand for gig workforce to be more? And how do you see this change in the future, if it is going to change? Because I did go through the research, and the research did say that, interestingly, the demand for gig workforce in traditional sectors, traditional in this case being technology and BPO, seems to be slowing down and seems to be rising in the non-traditional ones. So if you can just help us understand why that is happening and what other trends sectorally we can expect.
Sure. And I think I go back to what Shashank was saying. If we look at what, and like you said, what constitutes the majority of the gig workforce consumer today, what our research is, technology outsourcing organizations, number one, followed by the more traditional services space, right? Hospitality and stuff around that. And if you look at, let's say, at least the services portion of the market, that's a place where demand varies a lot, right? So take a hotel, for example. There is a certain amount of demand it has through the year, and then as peak seasons come, they need to augment workforce, and that's where the gig workers start coming in. Now, the way I look at it is essentially to say that in the past, when organizations needed tech work done, they would go to a tech firm and get them to do it, right? I think what we are beginning to see is the fact that outsourcing as a concept is going to move from a B2B to a B2C model, where when an organization wants to get something done, they want agility, they want pace. They don't want to try to go through the bureaucracy of trying to build a financial contract with another large organization. And the gig is a very elegant solution to that. And therefore, as we look at industries that are emerging on this, are industries that are also being hit the hardest by this entire wave of technology, right? So consumer, I think, is front and center in that journey. And if you look at it, consumer business models across the board are getting disrupted with technology, and they inherently don't stock that talent. The other places that we are seeing is banking and financial services. Again, huge play of technology over there, and again, not. I mean, yes, they've always stocked the mainframe guys, but they've never had the UI UX people. They never thought about consumerization of banking, and these are alien concepts to a bank. And if you look at it, the quickest way to go solve that is to get a bright 25-year-old who can build that from scratch for them and do that really well, right? So if I were to look at which industries have the highest potential, is the ones that haven't done it so far. So it's not technology, it's not services, it's going to be banking, it's going to be consumer, it's going to be pharma, and in pockets it's going to be manufacturing as well. I think with stuff around IoT, stuff around just just building the shop front on the internet that gets the customer in, like Shashank was saying. I think those are places where you will see greater demand going forward. And also those are places that have traditionally lagged in hiring that digital talent, right? It's not core to their ecosystem, it's not core to the work that they do. And I honestly see those, and that's what our data also says, that those places you will actually see a rapid acceleration of the gig workforce. I think within the sectors, what's important is also to understand that there are going to be stratification. Not all sectors will try to gig all jobs. I think one thing that comes across very clearly to us is organizations very clear that what is strategic differentiation, product. And when I say product, I mean the core product that they sell. Their sales engines they don't want to touch. What they're happy to get gig workers to come in and help them out with is the digital front. It's about, let's say, running inside sales, or it's about taking on some of the operations work. And surprisingly, to a degree, they're happy to let client operations be gigged, especially in places where, like I said, demand varies. But core product, core experience, sales, they don't want to touch.
And just to go a little deeper into that, Anirban, so you mentioned about the whole aspect of technology, and also traditionally operations and technology have been functional and roles where this has had the maximum amount of impact and demand. Where do you see roles like, for the matter, human resources, administration, R&D, right? I think some of the research alludes to the fact that not now, but in the future, it could. Do you see that happening, or that is still some time away? And other roles and functions where the giggable nature of jobs will start populating to?
Yeah, and that's a really nice question, in the sense that as we had the survey launched, and we were obviously watching data come in every day. And I remember calling a few of my colleagues who were working with me on this project to say, hey, HR seems to be a job that's going to get geeked. We don't have a future in HR the way we know it, right? And all jokes apart, I think what we're fundamentally seeing is, and I go back to the organization getting leaner, and therefore that the way I look at it is anything that's not core strategic, that is not in core strategic alignment to an organization, leaders are thinking about saying, okay, can we do this another way, right? And I look at portions of HR absolutely over there. I think things around recruitment, HR operations at the top of stack of jobs that can be gigged. When I look at administration, absolutely, again, there seems to be a lot of intent. R&D is an interesting one, and what we actually had done there was actually stratified to say, there are people in your organization that may do fundamental research, the blue sky thinking, versus people who are doing more product build out. And what organizations seem to be comfortable saying is, the blue sky guys, we can get gig workers to come in and do. But the moment we're touching the product and we're building a product for ourselves, that we won't let out. Right. So I think the way I look at it, that the gigability, if you call it, and we actually call it, so we came up with a name called the GPS, the Gig Promoter Score, which essentially measures how gigable a job is. I think it's unfair to say it's constant for a job function. I think within that, depending on how important the roles are to the success of the firm, you will see them being held close to the chest. The ones which are either you don't have the skills to do, or you believe are more tactical in nature, I think leaders are very willing to have gig workers come in and take that up.
If I may just add there, Rupank, I think one way I think we have constantly seen and observed is that if there's decision making involved on a day-to-day level in certain functions, and companies don't want those decisions to be made by somebody who's not an employee, not on their payrolls, those will not go away to gigs. It's as simple as that, right? So for different industries and different companies, these turn out to be different as to where they would like to make decisions and where they would not. And like, for instance, as I said, going back to the same manufacturing example, they would not like to make decisions on a daily basis as to how their website looks, what is their social media presence like, etc. Right? But they will care heavily about their supply chain. So that is not something they'll ever, give away.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you flip the thing for maybe a grocery platform, and they would gladly outsource the manufacturing, but they would not outsource the core experience of their customer on any of their platforms, even if it's a small bot on a messenger or a WhatsApp. They will not outsource that, right? So I think it's really about the way we see it. Increasingly, when we engage with customers, whatever is really close to their heart, that's not going to go away anytime soon from their orgs. As if they need to make those decisions, if somebody needs to take those calls every day, and they like having that control on a day-to-day level, they're going to keep that for time immemorial, for at least, I guess.
Yeah. So, Ruban, let me not belabor the point. Let me just add two things, and I think resonate very well with what Shashank is saying. One of the things we are looking at as doing as the next wave is trying to correlate the degree of automation we are seeing in jobs versus an organization's willingness to get gig workers to come in. Right. And as part of the next wave, what we honestly want to look at is to say, before organizations look at getting in the gig worker, and it'll be potentially in the more transactional areas, like Shashank is saying, the ones where you don't need day-to-day decisioning, are they automating a bunch of it before they get somebody to come and do it for them? The other thing, and I think I go back again in history, I'm a big fan of looking at history to look at what the future will look like. That was the same story you heard 30 years ago when you did outsourcing, right? That you keep what is core to you, don't let that go. There are other stuff that you can let out. I think we're just seeing a shift of who you would let it out to 30 years ago versus now.
Okay. And I can see a lot of questions coming onto our chat box as well, and I'll probably try to keep the last 10 minutes to pose those to both of you, because I think they are quite relevant and interesting ones. Let me ask Shashank a little bit about now. What are the criteria that organizations look at when they are looking to hire a freelancer? And I know, Anirban, your research has also put down some stuff, and I can ask you to add to this. But from a practical perspective, Shashank, when companies are looking to hire, what are they looking for? What are the criteria they use? And also, are there any yardsticks or specific ways of measuring performance for gig workers, which should be unique or different?
Right. I'll take the first one first.
Yeah.
I think, in every case, right? So again, dialing back, on some of the discussion we've had so far, when does a company really say I need to bring on somebody, and that somebody is not going to be on my payroll, right? As I said, it's either in one of two cases. Either it's because they're struggling with bandwidth, or because they believe they fundamentally don't have that core expertise in house, and hence they need to bring in somebody. Yeah. And if it is, if it's a niche skill or if it's an expensive skill, they probably cannot afford to pay the person full time, and hence, they make do with this sort of a approach, right? Now, in both these cases, naturally, thereby what happens? So if it's a niche skill, then obviously they're looking for somebody who's experienced, who has definitely played a role, or has either done projects or has operated in a full-time capacity in some area within that industry, within that niche, and has a lot of things to showcase and talk about as to how that has panned out and what that, what the outcomes were derived for the previous customer that they worked for, or the previous org that they worked for, right? So the portfolio case study of those problem statements and how they went about solving them, what are the different milestones. So the more and more clarity a gig worker can bring to that table, the better, right? It's as simple as that, right? So I don't know much in this table. So hey, but we found somebody who can come and add value, who can teach us and at the same time put it into action, right? So that's the sort of outlook with which most companies are going to look for if they're looking at a niche thing. Now, if they're looking or trying to solve mainly for the bandwidth issue, then it's a simple function of, again, portfolio of work, right? Portfolio of work, great references, what are some of the things, how are they, and all gig workers obviously attain a certain level of premium if they have a great personal brand. Let's say they have a, if you're trying to bring on a creative director to help you out, or a, even a great graphic designer, you having a lot of followers on Instagram or Behance, etc., and constantly being engaged, clearly is going to work in your favor, right? Because your work is out there for everybody to see. So it's not going to be so much about, hey, I'm going to interview you, I'm going to give you an assignment like in a full-time role, or there's a very structured process of evaluation and assessment before I can roll out an offer to you, right? Here it is largely going to, I mean, at least just to speak in layman terms, what I have increasingly seen is that, hey, look, we need to get here in this much time. How can you help us get there, right? And the gig worker who's able to convince you the most, both from a social proof, their own credibility, and who's able to give you that confidence, right? As somebody, as a manager or as a business owner, you're going to sort of make that bet on that person. Is, very, very, I know it's not maybe very scientific, but anecdotally at least I can tell you this is what happens on a day-to-day level, right? In more cases than not. Uh, in terms of, if you can repeat the second question, Rupang, I'm so sorry.
It was more about how do companies measure performance, given that this is on a
Right,
standalone basis, right? So are there any
right.
specific parameters that they employ for looking at performance?
Right. So I think in both cases, right, what we have seen increasingly is there's always a scope of work that's defined before the engagement begins, right? In fact, a lot of times we've seen that the first conversation, proper conversation, or even the first meeting pre-COVID used to happen once the scope of work, everything is already defined, and, deciphered for both parties quite clearly, with different sorts of milestones to track that progress, along the various steps in the time period. So let's say you're doing a quarter long project. More often than not, what happens is every week or every 2 weeks, there's a certain set of milestones to be met by the gig worker. And, increasingly what we saw was that the clear bar of performance is A, that did it happen on time, and did it happen to the expected quality standards, right? I think those are the first two things for sure. More often than not, time is a pretty critical factor, in sort of maybe lesser niche ones, whereas skill is a huge, or quality is a huge factor in some of the niche areas, because people want to make sure that they're getting the value for their buck, right? Uh, so those are the two things that we've seen. And usually when these milestones are not met or not on track, etc., we have seen instances where companies or the gig worker says that it is not going to go to fruition, so let's stop it right here. So we've even seen that happen from time to time, because if they feel that they're not a great match in the first week or two, then they just end it right then and there. And that's also the flexibility on both sides, right? This is one of the advantages on both sides. So yeah, I think that's by and large what we've seen.
And Anirban, is this similar to what you've seen in the research? Would you like to add here that you've seen the research?
So I think I'll just add a couple of things to what Shashank was saying. I think uh, the advantage till now is that the gig worker has or predominantly worked in environments that were familiar with what they were getting, right? So if they went and did a piece of work with a tech firm, the tech firm essentially said, okay, this is one of us, choose to not work in an organization. We understand how he or she works, and we resonate with that. I think as as the next wave of organizations come in, banks or insurance companies or consumer, there's a very different mindset when they look at talent, right? So there is a lot of weight given today on experience, on pedigree, etc., etc. And the gig economy or the gig workforce was completely different, right? There, it's about, like Shashank said, here's the body of work, irrespective of how old I am, irrespective of what's my pedigree, etc. And I think as organizations get in, especially as the more non-traditional organizations get in, there is going to be a collision of two worlds. One which is going to say, measure me by my outcome. The other that's going to say years of experience and where have you worked before, right? And I think that's something that's going to take some getting used to on both sides. Uh, on the other side, on the performance side, let me give a counter view to not a counter view, a different view to what Shashank was saying. Uh, I'm looking at it from an organization, right? And the way I look at it, if I'm getting somebody to come in and do a gig for me, if they're good, I would want to make sure that more often than not, they choose to come and work for me, right? So if I have a series of gigs available, I don't want to go get a new person every time. I want to get the person I know, I trust, etc., and therefore I bring them in. And I think that's where organizations need to think about evolution, because today they don't capture that information, right? So if I've done a gig and we've said good job and I move on, next time, unless it's Shashank who hired me the first time, there's no context, there's no organizational memory of what I've done. And I almost look at saying, as organizations look at ramping this up, how do they start building that organizational memory of me as a gig worker? And I think on that, organizations haven't thought about it a lot, right? Right now it's still person dependent. If Shashank was my hiring manager for the last 3 times, he knows how good or bad I am. But if I come to you, Rupank, you have no clue, right? And I'm looking at performance from that perspective to say, how are organizations storing it? More importantly, if I'm somebody who generally does a bang up job, do I start getting a premium for it, right? Because that's how you would pay a high performer within your organization. If I'm a gig worker and I come in and exceed expectations every time, I expect a premium on that, right? And these are things I think organizations are at very early stages of trying to figure out, because the way I look at it, for this to be successful, there has to be some sort of a bond that's being formed between the employer and the gig worker. It can't be all transactional, as it is, right? It can't be the procurement guy who today buys a pencil, tomorrow goes and hires a gig worker. There has to be a relationship that gets built over a period of time, and I think companies haven't thought about that a lot.
Fair enough. So you actually spoke about the whole part of the bond that they want to forge with the, with the gig workers. Now, the fundamental challenge that we had even spoken about a couple of years back when we introduced this concept and still talked about is the fact that it still ends up being a transactional relationship. What a full-time job can get you in terms of rewards, benefits, and policies, and culture and affiliation, very difficult for a gig worker to get. However, companies have made some progress on that. So, question to both of you, and you can, and maybe Anirban, you can go first, and Shashank, you can give a particular experience on this. That what are organizations doing to build an ecosystem for freelancers or solopreneurs, as Shashank would call them, in terms of the reward practices, both monetary, non-monetary, benefits, policies, which will probably be more engaging than just a pure transaction.
So, okay, I can't take the name of the organization, but a few months back, I was actually talking to one of the HR leaders of one of India's largest business groups, and what they are doing, which I think is a brilliant idea, and I honestly believe that has to be the way forward, is they're trying to create an ecosystem for the gig worker within the organization. So, let's say somebody starts a job with that organization through TapChief, but after that, what that organization is doing is to say, hey, you did well, here are 3 other opportunities you can take. Here is discounted insurance you could buy. Here is another slew of benefits I will give you because you are part of my gig ecosystem within the organization. And I don't think there are enough organizations thinking about that. I think most of them are saying, it's a transaction, let's finish it and go move ahead. I think the ones that are ahead of the curve are essentially trying to figure out what, like, I'll give you an example, right? So one thing that surprises me, and I am no longer as young as Shashank is, but do you not worry about retirement, right? Do you not worry about your savings, and will you work till you're 70? And chances are we're not, right? We all need that kitty that's built out, and formal employment allows you to build for that through provident fund and gratuity and whatnot. But I think more and more organizations are sitting down, at least the leading ones are sitting down and saying, how do we start providing some of those social security norms to the gig worker? I know the government's also talking about it, but I think as you go down, the journey will be to say, how do I build that ecosystem that you're part of that starts fulfilling some of your needs that you have as a human being? I'm not even saying employee, right? Need for affiliation, need for achievement, need for security. I think the successful ones, and these will be ones that do it at scale, will figure that out. And that's going to be, I think, one hell of a journey to watch as organizations build that out over a period of time.
Shashank?
No, I think I agree a lot with what Anirban said. I think, what's clear is that not enough people are obviously thinking about it as of yet. Because, in all honesty, I think it's still, a lot of organizations and leaders are still finding their feet about, how do you engage gig workers, firstly transactionally, and then, obviously for the long term, mid to long term, etc. So I think I foresee a HR like team just exclusively for gig workers in most large business groups as they move forward and make gig workers as a core part of their talent acquisition strategy, right? I think that's something that I definitely foresee. And when that happens is when a lot of the things I think Anirban just spoke of will start falling in place, right? If not already. Uh, Obviously, I think the sense of belonging, the sense of some level of security could be, in terms of insurance, benefits of other kinds, like, like a savings fund, personal finances, could be many things. And these are also honestly things that, platforms like mine I know for a fact a bunch of other platforms are constantly thinking about to see that what can we do more, right? One of the things we are honestly contemplating is, can we, like, we're in fact right now in conversations with multiple health insurance providers to say that, hey, come and give health insurance at a very, very discounted rate to all of the workers on our platform. Uh, Simply because it just makes so much sense. And for the gig worker, I know from our end, it's a huge sense of belonging that, that was the last thing they were expecting, right? They were expecting a transaction, a gig, get paid and move on, right? That's all, more often than not, at least what they've been conditioned to so far. I think the ones who rank very highly on empathy, now that could be by virtue of these benefits or something as simple as, them engaging and saying that, hey, you worked on a gig with us. Here are 5 people in our company who you can engage with and be in touch with, as you move along. I think can itself go a long way, right? So I think that community building is going to slowly improve, like how companies used to sort of try and make sure that their alums and are engaged constantly. I think these gig workers may be a new cohort, but I think the more and more they start moving in that direction, it will be quite phenomenal. And even platforms like ours, I think for that matter, if we forget that whole aspect of community and we are just like, hey, these many gigs, we're growing, this is the gross service value, etc., etc. If we make it all about numbers, I think we are going to lose steam at some point or the other, because ultimately, I think what all of us, know for a fact and need to reinforce again and again is that ultimately we're dealing with people, right? And people as social beings need that extra piece beyond a transaction in any form that you deem fit, right? So I think for each organization, each platform needs to figure what works for them the best and what they can do consistently, right? I think that consistency is also equally important. Uh, so yeah, I think those two, as long as that happens, I think that will be a new way and a new manner in which companies can have a much extended network rather than just employees or folks who have worked for them in the past.
Sure. Just a couple of, I think, last questions that I had in mind before we jump on to what the audience has been asking, and we've got a bunch of very pertinent questions. I think the first one is that now, given that we're in COVID, and you did mention that COVID has sort of exacerbated the whole aspect of gig because it's led to a recession. It's pushed people out to look for alternate ways of employing, and at the same time, the convergence of digital has also pushed the whole rise of gig in the last year or so. Um, so, one question that I had in mind was that, are there any roles, gig roles, which are pandemic proof, in the sense that they were in demand even before the pandemic, they are in demand even now, and COVID hasn't changed anything about the demand for those particular kind of roles.
Right. So see, I think anything to do with, so I think, see, what changed significantly post COVID, right? All of us were forced to work remotely, irrespective of the industry we were operating in. So anybody or any set of skills which is enabling that, either as in the form of demand generation for businesses or in the form of collaboration, is always going to stay, which basically, long story short, is anything to do with technology-based skills which enables digital growth in the form of digital marketing, SEO, design. Some of these things were growing quite fast even pre-pandemic and continue to grow fast even post-pandemic from what we've seen. In fact, it's gotten even more impetus than ever. I think some of the areas which obviously have taken a hit are anything which involved in-person gig workers, like I think once where Anirban mentioned, where in peak season you involve more delivery partners, or in peak season you involve maybe more folks in your retail shops and so on and so forth. I think some of those have definitely suffered, and probably that drawback is going to continue for a while to come. Or folks who are going out and doing on-site audits, right? Let's say if you're a large e-commerce, hospitality marketplace like a hotel aggregator, you would want each one of your hotels checked. So they would largely use gig workers to do some of these things, because it was not easy to have people on your payroll go to so many locations across the board. It was just cost ineffective. So I think some of those have obviously suffered by virtue of the constraints that have been bestowed upon all of us. But yeah, I think, but by far, things to do with technology, software development, digital growth, design, because today everybody, even a small tier 3 business, wants a nice logo, wants a nice brand palette for themselves, irrespective of what they're selling or in which industry they're in, right? So I think some of those things to just stand out and all of these things, right? I think they will continue to grow irrespective of what comes around, because of the headroom to unlock in terms of growth for these businesses on the World Wide Web.
Right. I think one question that we had received from one of our earlier audiences, and even when the research was being launched, was that do companies like to hire aging workforce as a freelancer? Because there are lots of people who are now forced to take PRS, or who are forced to take time early, right? And they would like to be employed, right? So Anirban, has the research showed up anything on that? And Shashank, do you end up seeing companies hiring those kind of professionals?
So, so the research is silent on that, but I can give you some initial thoughts I see, and I think one of the biggest impetus to gig, at least my view, is going to be the fact that a client of mine told me this a couple of years back. Indians are very ageist, right? So most of us, if we can work into our mid 40s in a formal job, I think we will be lucky, right? And I think that's going to be India's biggest challenge, is to say that a large portion of your gig worker, maybe 5 years down the line, may not be the 25-year-old, may actually be the 45-year-old who no longer has full-time employment. And I think I honestly don't know what Shashank's view on whether organizations will take them or not, but I honestly believe that as a population is going to spurt now, given everything that we've gone through over the last year or so.
Right. In all honesty, yeah, it's still early for us also to call. But I agree with Anirban that there's going to be a spurt for sure, because I think both from a mental, market standpoint as well as personal individual standpoint, right? You see so many firms, small firms, agencies, etc., or individual practices being set up by people who have had a long and a good corporate career, right? So that is something that's something that they want to do. But is it going to sustain? Is our companies going to be as willing, etc.? Is, I think, something that's we're yet to wait and watch. Obviously, in areas like finance, for instance, if you want like a virtual CFO, I think those areas, anything which companies are very happy and comfortable to have gray hair, I think those will obviously thrive very well, right? Things like finance, things like regulation, policy making, any one of these, all of them will thrive well. I am obviously yet to see about how does that play out in technology or in in a design or some of these areas, yet to see. But yeah, some of the more core central aspects, like even HR, for instance, like if I can get, even I, for my own business, if I can get a 40, 45-year-old great HR sort of compensation person to come and help me out and create that, I think that's something I will obviously be more comfortable than a 30-year-old HR doing it for me, right? So in some sense, we do all of us as business owners and leaders also have some of our own biases, maybe because of the conditioning, etc. But yeah, I think it's still a bit early to call, in all honesty, Rupan.
So basically, Anirban, folks like you and me have some hope when we.
We're going to work with Irfan after this.
Okay, great. Let me just move on to the last part of our discussion. Probably spend another 5-10 minutes, go a little bit beyond 8 o'clock. That is our cut-off time. And I'm trying to pick up some, interesting questions which haven't been covered so far in our discussion. One, actually, a couple of them are pretty similar, and I'd like to ask both of you. So Rishikesh asks, there's a grapevine that more than half of the total workforce would be entrepreneurs in the next decade. How should one stand out in that case? And then the next question was, what will the role personal branding play for freelancers to get projects, or will it be the core skills and quality be the key metric? So I think the fundamental thing is that there could be a rat race, or there could be a differentiation required even in the gig economy, right? If majority of us are going to be in that, how do you stand out, and how do you make sure that you have enough of your credibility and brand and something else built in that you stand out amongst the entire gig workforce?
Right. So I think in the startup world, there's a funny saying, right, that you build great products and great products sell itself, right? Nothing could be farther from the truth. Just doesn't happen. In fact, if you go look at some of the, world's class products, a good 20-30% of their revenue goes on sales and marketing. I think it's very, very similar when it comes to an individual. I don't think it's any different, right? Because ultimately, what does personal branding mean, and why is that necessary? I think it just simply puts you in, is putting yourself and positioning yourself as a thought leader in a niche, and say that you can do anything and everything in this, and you can do it really, really well. And that against a generic person, right? So let's say a simple example. If I'm a great UI UX designer for all forms of BFSI products, versus I'm a great UI UX designer in general, right? I've operated across verticals, etc. If I'm a BFSI customer, I'm going to go to the person and opt for the person who's established their niche in BFSI. It's as simple as that. So the role of personal branding is to make sure that you're positioning yourself extremely well. So I don't know if it's inappropriate to say, but at least the way I really honestly see it is, think of yourself as the product as to how do you want to position it yourself, right? What is the audience you're trying to cater to? Don't try to be everything for everybody. If you say, I'm going to be a designer for all sorts of companies, enterprises, startups, funded companies, unicorns, that's not going to work, right? I think it's very, very critical to figure out which niche do you want to operate in, and really hone that niche by building a community around you, by ensuring you hang out at places where this community exists in the first place. Like if you're going to try and be a gig worker with funded companies in India, if you're not on Twitter, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? Because you need to understand that the majority of the tech Twitter in India, tech Twitter audience lies in Twitter, right? They're not on LinkedIn, they're not on Facebook. So similarly, if you're going to appeal on something a little more regulatory, could be, as I said, like the virtual CFO, etc., then you've got to make sure that you're adding a lot of value on LinkedIn, on some of these places, or you're maybe writing a newsletter very frequently or on a consistent basis, or you're doing videos for free to establish an audience around you. In every facet or any vertical, I think what is clear is that the person with a personal branding, where you feel like, oh yeah, I've heard of that person, and we're talking to them to see if I can work with them, is always going to garner a premium. It's the fact, like any other product out there. So it's an absolute necessity if you want to garner the top percentile of the hourly rates, top percentile of the project rates, right? If one is comfortable operating in the median, of course, you probably did not put these efforts. But even then, I think, you're doing a disservice. So the way I see it is, if you're a gig worker, if you're not spending 20-30% of your time setting up the basis and the foundation for future revenue, future projects, then you're not helping yourself, in all honesty. Irrespective of how many platforms like mine come around or whatever happens, you need to be doing that for yourself.
There's also a more tactical question that has been asked by Abhinav, that how do you ensure that the freelancer does not directly connect to the client outside the platform? Is there something that you actually encourage? Is there something that you watch out for? Is there a policy? Is there something that you sign as an agreement?
Yeah, so see, in certain cases, I think it's an absolute necessity that the customer and the freelancer are interacting end to end, especially niche projects, etc. We honestly don't focus so much on that. A lot of our customers like that layer of them not having to interact with more people, especially post COVID, because they all have enough people to manage and deal with anyway. So the way at least they use TapChief today is that they order tasks on our platform. Largely, a lot of these don't involve too much decision making. As I said, it's content creation, it's marketing, sort of tasks, and so on, which goes through a set of workflows and is completed, and the end deliverable comes back to the customer. So unless there's a real need, this doesn't happen. So by virtue of which, they don't interact at all in the first place. But we have seen, we had done a bunch of experiments in the past where we had a bunch of niche projects happening. There, if the customer and the freelancer are not interacting, it's not going to be successful in the first place. You've set it up for failure. So yeah, so it's as a platform, if you think of it, it's about what do you stand for and what is your key focus area. Are the tasks on your platform more niche in nature, or are they more standardized in nature? But depending upon what you pick, the relevant thing happens.
Right. Anirban, a couple of questions that strike me, I think, which would be good for you to respond to. Aman has asked these questions. So, the first one is that, do you see the gig economy arriving at minimum rates for different gigs, offset rates being pushed lower? Secondly, with earnings and stability going out, do you see our larger economic system becoming different? So that merits a consultant's reply. So, Nirban, I'll let you tackle that.
Could you bring that question up again? That was a big question.
Sorry?
So could you bring that question up again? That was a very big question.
Okay, so why don't we see it in parts? Do you see the gig economy arriving at minimum rates for different gigs to offset rates being pushed lower?
Yeah, so and that's a funny question, right? Because as Shashank was describing his vision of what the successful gig worker is like, in my mind, there are two things that come up, right? That sounds like a consulting job because you're spending 20% of your time doing BD and 80% of your time doing delivery. And it also is akin to running your own organization, right? That you need to be your sales person, you need to be your marketing person, you need to be your delivery person, etc. Now, honestly, the biggest challenge of minimum rates being set is the fact that this is a very fragmented market. That if you're not willing to do it at a certain price, somebody else will be willing to do it at a certain price, unless there is a degree of cartelization that starts happening, right? And I mean, if you look at Indian industry, if you look at what our newer industries are, like technology, etc., they haven't been able to unionize. Is it possible that the gig workers do that and build a minimum wage ceiling, etc.? It seems unlikely unless there's government legislation coming in. And if you look at our government historically, and I'm not talking about current dispensation for anybody who's listening, they have always stayed away from the white collar job, right? That it's been predominantly the blue collar and protection of interest over there. And therefore, I honestly don't see minimum wage being set there. Right, I think especially in an economy that's not going to be firing all guns blazing, there will be somebody who'll pick up a job at the price it's available. What was the second consulting question you had?
The second consulting question was, with earnings and stability going out, do you see our larger economic system becoming different?
Yeah, and scarily different. In the sense that I mean, and it's true in the US already. My sense is it's going to be sooner rather than later in India as well. I think real earning is going down. Right, real earning is going down. On top of that, there is diminishing opportunity above a certain period in your career, and that I don't see short-term earning go down. I honestly believe that if you're a young engineer coming out of a decent college in India, the world's your oyster. You can shop around, go work wherever you want, make a good deal of money. At the age of 45, I would assume 8 out of 10 of them may not have a job, right? And I see that causing a fair degree of economic uncertainty, especially at a time when they'd be loaded with mortgages and liabilities and stuff like that. Uh, so the long-winded answer is yes. I mean, I look at it, and I am very traditional at the core of my heart. I look at it as a very scary system try to live in, right? Where you are going to use gigs to potentially pay your bills. It will cause stress in the system, right? Because a lot of us aren't mentally built that way because we've not seen it in our 20s.
Yeah, agree. Okay, I'll take one last question now, and Shashank, I'll take this to you. This has been asked by Anirudh. It's a slightly philosophical question, not philosophical, but more about a mindset question. How do we reconcile the traditional Indian organizational mindset of employees not taking up work outside of the job to actually employing large numbers of gig workers? Have you seen this change over time? Are you able to influence it as somebody from the outside, or do you think this will take some time to really become what it should?
Yeah, I mean, see, there is going to be a certain level of friction and discomfort period, I believe, where uh, people, especially in people management roles, business leaders, etc., will wonder, okay, what if our employees start going and doing different gigs, or maybe our competitors? What happens then? If we are bringing in, gig workers, if they see that as an example and they go start doing it, what happens? So I think these are all, going to be very. I mean, I really don't have a straight answer to it because, honestly, I've not operated businesses at that level to give a conclusive answer. Maybe Anirban can chime in better here, but in all honesty, the way I see it is that there is definitely going to be some level of friction, but I think sooner than later, there is going to be again some level of policy making, some level of governance that companies do employ for their own workers. Some level of declarations, etc. I think will definitely come in place. Uh, the organizational traditional mindset has obviously been that, right? That most employment agreements state that you cannot have any other source of income. But I think a good portion, if you go ask, in private at least, will tell you that, hey, I violated that undoubtedly more often than not. So there has to be some legal coherence and meeting of minds somewhere in between on this front. If that's through declarations, if that's through being full disclosure, etc., is not something I can remark very very well on, in all honesty. But I do see that changing though. I think that's not going to be completely as opaque as it is as of today, because it's already happening, and once it's already starts happening, everybody needs to find a way to make it still work in compliance, right? So I think that's my limited view on the subject.
So let me just add 2 cents to I think what Shashank is saying, and
Sure, sure.
uh, I remember, like you said, Rupam, we were doing this around a couple of years back, and in the past, the employee-employer relationship has been David versus Goliath, right? And David had a slingshot. I think technology and folks like TapChief and others have essentially given David a machine gun, right? So I think that equation is going to change. It's going to change very dramatically, and I think the organizations are going to play catch up on this now.
Yeah, I would probably tend to agree there. Okay, guys, I think we'll have to, wrap up now. I think we've managed to get some great insights here. I think there are still a few questions unanswered, and there'll be lots of more. But I encourage all the folks who have logged in. Thank you for joining in. But do feel free to reach out to any of us for all of your questions and queries. We are happy to talk more about our research that Anirban has led, as it's sort of we've already released it and we'll be talking more about it. But if that can bring in more insights and more discussion points, that's great. Shashank, thank you so much. I think from the looks of it, gig is here to stay, and so one can safely say that you have a good thing going, and you'll have your hands full. And Anirban, while you've made the solemn, observation about salaries coming down and overall, you know, income levels getting impacted due to COVID, the fact is that older people like you and me will probably have jobs at some point of time later as well. So I think we should take heart from the fact that it's a fact. But thank you both very much for joining today's session. And as more and more questions come to us, feel free to just respond to them on social media or any other platform. Thank you once again for joining.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for being a wonderful moderator, Rupang.
Thank you, Shashank. Thanks, Anirban.
Great. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.